Masechet Ketubot, Daf Mem Zayin. We're going through the list of items that a father has authority over his daughter about, and comparing that to additional things that a husband has authority and rights over his wife. So one of the items on the list was B'ma'aseh Yadeha. The Mishnah said that the father has a right to the earnings of his daughter. Minalan, what is the source? Damarav Yehuda, Damarav Huna, Amarav Minayin Shemaseh Bat La'av. He asked this very question. How do you know that the daughter's wages go to the father? Shneimar v'chim kol ishet bito le'ama ma'ama ma'aseh yadeh le'rabba af bat ma'aseh yadeha le'aviha. Since a father has a right to sell off his daughter as a maidservant, so just like a maidservant, anything that she works, all her earnings own or go to the master, so too a daughter, all of her earnings go to the father. It makes sense. If a father has a right to sell off his daughter completely, then certainly he would have a right to her earnings. Good. Emma. We're going to note later that the word le'amak is also an extra word. Kim kol ish et bito, period. If he's selling her, she's going to be an ama. So le'ama is that she is like an ama. There is a similarity even when she's under her father's authority. Similarity is that earnings go to the master, go to the father. Now this pasuk is talking about a ketana under 12. The father has a right to sell her. But a father cannot sell his daughter once she passes 12 as a na'ara. And so therefore, you might think that as a na'ara, when she works, she can keep her own earnings. So how do we know that na'ara also the father gets the earnings? So we try to answer. It simply makes sense, because if you think that she keeps her own earnings and they don't go to the father, well then the fact that the father has a different right to marry her off, the Rachamana, the Torah, Hashem, gives the father the right to marry her off and give her into a wedding ceremony as a na'ara. How could that be? During that time, she will not be able to go to work. In other words, the father says, hey, I'm marrying you off, and it's going to be, tomorrow, Tuesday afternoon. Well, now she's going to miss work on Tuesday afternoon. So what right the father can't have, if the daughter, na'ara, keeps her own wages, then the father has no right to ask his daughter, force his daughter not to go to work, because now she's losing out. Whereas if the father gets the wages, then it makes sense. The father can say, hey, you're not going to be working today. The father is losing the wages, but the father said he wants that to happen. So he has the authority to make her go and get married on that day. It takes time to get married. You got to prepare. You got to, the wedding itself, the Sheva Berachot. So there must be that the father does have the right over his daughter's time, and therefore over her earnings. Good. Now, Parich Rav Achai, Ema dihebla sechar peka'ata. Rav Achai says that's not a good reason to argue to prove that a na'ara, the earnings go to the father, because it could be that the earnings go to her, and the father, if he wants to marry her off during the day, on a work day, then he would have to pay for the lost wages, right? She says, I'm going to lose wages if I get married. I don't want that. So he'll say, I'll cover the wages. Maybe that's why he gets the right to marry her off. Or he schedules the wedding for nighttime. Nowadays, we often we have weddings at night. That's because we have artificial light. But back then, it would make much more sense to have a wedding during the day when you have daylight. But if he does it at night when she's not working anyway, so then she's not losing out on work. Or if he's scheduled for a Shabbat or Yom Tov. We don't actually make weddings on Shabbat Yom Tov, but it could be right before. They would actually do this often is Erev Shabbat. They would make a wedding ceremony on Friday afternoon, and then the celebration and the party and the meal would go in and would combine with Seudat Shabbat, and that's permitted. And so nobody's working on Shabbat afternoon anyway, so he can find a time where she's not working, and so therefore his right to marry her off does not collide with her right to keep her wages. So really, there's no proof from here. Rather, we're going to have another proof that not only ketana but also na'ara, the father gets the wages. Ela ketana la sericha kera hashta zabunim ezaben la maseh ademi ba'eh. Rather, ketana, we don't even need a pasuk, because it's obvious if the father can sell off his daughter's ketana, obviously he can get the wages. Ela ki istirich kera le na'ara. Right, the pasuk is for a na'ara. Now, the pasuk we're talking about is the one that says a father can sell off his ketana as a maidservant. But we're not just learning from the simple reading of the Pesukim, but she explains from that extra word, le'ama. So besides the simple reading that says a father has a right to sell off his ketana daughter, from that, it's obvious he has right to the earning. But for the derasha of this pasuk, like why do you need to say it? Why do you have to add the word ama? That will come to include na'ara as well. Next item on the list is Pafarat Nedareha. A father can annul his young daughter's vows. That's explicit in the Pisukim about annulling vows. A father can do it when she is a Na'ara and in her father's house, to exclude when she's either a Bogeret or she is married off. Even me'oreset, we saw the father will no longer have exclusive rights to annul her vows. Umekabelet kita, if he marries her off as a ketana and now she gets divorced, the husband should give the divorce document to the father. He can receive it on behalf of his daughter. In the case of a woman who leaves one man and then goes and marries a second one, and she can't go back to the first one, since it says the word back to back, so we make a hekesh that leaving the marriage is like entering the marriage. Just like a father has a right to marry off his daughter and he gets the money, so too when the daughter is young, as a minor, and still gets divorced, the father is one that receives the divorce paper. If a daughter receives land that she owns herself, then the father does not have a right over the produce of that land. Well, during her lifetime, if she would die, the father may be the inheritor. So that's a different story. But while she's alive, she keeps her own produce. Teno Rabbanan. This is unlike a husband, where while they're married, a husband is allowed to keep the produce. Teno Rabbanan. Now we learn that's actually a machloket. Our Mishnah is the same as the Tanakama of this baraita, that the father does not receive the produce. But Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda says the father does receive the produce. What's the essence of their argument? Tanakama sabar bishlama ba'al takinu le rabbanan pere timken mimna vela parik ela av ma'ika lememar timna velo parik. Well, the Takama thinks that a husband, the rabbi said that a husband does get the produce. Why? That's in exchange for his obligation to redeem his wife from captives. If kidnappers come and take her, the husband has an obligation. It's in the Ketubot that he has to come up with money to redeem her. So, in exchange, he gets the produce from the field. But a father, if someone's daughter gets kidnapped, what is a father going to just sit back and not redeem her? Right? He's going to let her be taken? No, he's going to do it anyway. So, since a father is going to redeem his captive daughter anyway, therefore, there's no reason that he should get the rights of the produce. Interesting assumption that if the husband was not receiving the rights of the produce, then he would allow his wife to stay with the captors. Belav hachi parik, right? But a father, in any case, would redeem his daughter. All right, that's the Tanakama. That's why he thinks the father doesn't get it. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda sabar, avna memim navela parik sabar, kisad nikita ilava tezil v'tifrok nafsha. Rabbi Yehuda says even a father would not redeem his daughter. We're not talking about all cases. We're talking about if the daughter has a nice nest egg. She has this land, and the land is producing produce, and the produce is all those earnings are being put away in an escrow account for her until she grows up. So if she has this pouch of money that she's saving up, and now kidnappers come and they say, we want $50,000, and she has $50,000. So the father's going to be like, why should I come up with $50,000 to redeem my daughter? She has her own bank account. Let her use that money. So the Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda says it's the same. Okay, so actually we can clarify what the deal with the husband as well. Even according to Nakama, it's not like the husband is going to say, take my wife and leave her there. The point is that if the wife has her own money from produce that she is keeping and saving, and she gets kidnapped, then the husband would say, I don't want to pay for it. She has her own money. Let her use that money that she's saving up for the redemption. But if she doesn't have produce, if she doesn't own land, then we would also assume that the husband is going to redeem his wife. And he would have an obligation to. Okay, so anyway, so they, according to the Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda, it's the same thing for both a wife and a daughter. If there is produce, the husband will expect her to use it for the redemption, and so therefore instead he gets it in both cases. He says but just like a husband and a father both get the produce all the time, and in exchange they are obligated and expected to redeem their wife/daughter. Now, niset yater alav habal shehu ochel. Okay, that's all the things that have to do with the father. Now, a husband has an extra obligation and a right that he does get the perot of her property. Tenu Rabbanan katav la perot kesut vekelim sheyavo ima mibet avia lebet ba'ala meta lo zacha ba'al bedvarim halalu mishum Rabbi Yonatan amru zacha ba'al bedvarim halalu. Okay, now Baraita is going to give an important machloket. If a husband a father wrote for included in the ketubah a certain amount of produce and clothing and vessels, meaning a dowry, right? The father of the bride would often give a dowry to the couple. The point is that they give them some a startup money so that they can build a house and build a life together. So the father of the bride is going to bring those things into the house. Swani. And then you'll take this. Here he gives it to his daughter and says, you will take this to your husband's house and you'll have it together. So in other words, it's going to go to the husband. Now, if they get married and the wife dies, then the husband keeps all that stuff. If she brought it into the marriage, so clearly it would belong to him. But if she dies before the marriage, before the wedding ceremony, so it's after Kiddushin, they have all the gifts, and now she dies. Lo zacha baal, but the husband cannot keep it. The father can take it back because the father gave it to them to help out with their marriage, but they never were married, so the father did not intend to give it to them. However, Rabbi Natan says the husband does get it, right? The father gave it to them already. This is a gift on being engaged, and he's so happy that they're together, and that's it. He gave it already, and even though she dies before the chuppah, still the husband can keep it. Okay, so this is important machloket. Now, we're going to try to match it up with another machloket about the other way around. As machloket between these two Tanaim. Ditnan, we have a Mishnah coming up later in Ketubot. Nit armela o nit garesha, ben mina nisuin, ben mina erusin, goba et hakol. Now we're talking about the money that he promises to give her. And that is composed of two parts. One is the base amount of 100 or 200 zuz, and then there's the added amount that we still add in today. Let's say it's 18,000 is a standard number we often use today. So if he writes in the ketubah, I'm going to give you, in addition to the base amount, $18,000. And she is widowed. He dies. Or they get divorced. So he has to pay it. Whether they were married with chuppah or whether they had only kiddushin. So you see that even though it's only kiddushin, and he dies, his estate or they get divorced in between, he or his estate will have to pay all 18,000. That is Tanakama. So you see, according to him, the ketubah is effective, even though they weren't married yet. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah omer min nisuin gobat hakol, min ha'erusin betula goba 200 v'almana maneh. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, however, says no. If they were married, and certainly she can collect all 18,000. But if they only had kiddushin, then she gets the base amount. Betula 200 almana maneh. Yes, that it's effective to that extent. Shelo katab la ela almenat lechonsa. But the rest of it, the 18,000, the husband only put that in the ketubah on condition that they would complete the marriage. He would bring her into his house. It didn't happen, so he didn't want to give the 18,000. All right, so now that we have these two machalokot, we can match them up. Leman damar lo zacha, according to the opinion above that said that the dowry that the father brings into the marriage, the husband cannot keep it if she dies before the wedding, meaning that he gave her these he gave the gifts to the couple, and they're written in the ketubah, right? It says all the things that the father gave in the dowry, but if the marriage didn't happen, he cannot keep it, meaning they're on condition that they get married. The ketubah is not effective. So that opinion would agree with Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah that the ketubah is not effective the other way either, that she cannot collect the 18,000 that he promised in the marriage. The ketubah till today has both sides. Her father is going to bring in, we still write today, Mibeh Abu, from her father's house. Her father is going to bring in, he's going to bring in some items. If they never get married, neither collects it. So it makes sense to put those together. Oman damar zacha ke rabanan, whereas the opinion that says he does receive the dowry, even though the marriage didn't happen, that would be the same as Rabbanan here, who say that she can collect that 18,000 even though the chuppah never happened. Okay, so that makes sense to put them together. But then we say, not necessarily. Lo de kule alma Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Maybe, in fact, everyone in the first machloket agrees with Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. In the second machloket, he's the one that said that if they had only erusin, you get the base amount, but she does not collect the 18,000. Everyone agrees with that. Manda lo zacha, the one who said that the husband does not keep the dowry, that makes sense. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. In other words, the ketubah is not effective. Both sides neither collect. Umanda zacha ad kan lo kamar Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah ela midide ledida shelo katab la ela almenat lechonsa. But the one who says that the husband does receive the dowry, he would say that yes, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said that she will not collect the 18,000, whatever is going from him to her, because he only wrote that extra amount on condition that the marriage would be fulfilled. Aval medida ledide, but the money that's going from her to him, meaning from her father to him, the dowry, afilu Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah modeh mishum ihatunehu veha ihatene lehu. When the father gave it, he wasn't giving it on condition of the chuppah, he was giving it on condition of the Hatan, the fact that there is a groom that's joining the family, and already from the time of the kiddushin, the marriage is already set forth, and even though it's not consummated, that his wife did not go and move in with him, nevertheless, the father was happy to give these gifts already before the marriage, just based on the kiddushin. And so it really has to do with the mental state and assumptions of these gifts that are given. And the truth is, there is actually a really important difference, which is that the father does already give these items beforehand, whereas the ketubah is not paid until the marriage is ended. So So it makes sense that there would be a distinction between the two directions. All right, next. Chayav b'mizonoteha. A husband is required to feed his wife. Teno Rabbanan. Tikinu mizonoteha tachad ma'aseh yadeha. So the Baraita explains that the husband's obligation to provide sustenance to his wife is in exchange for her earnings. Now, it doesn't mean she has to go to work. If she doesn't go to work, he still has to feed her. He has to feed her no matter what. But if she does work, then the earnings go to the husband. And he's obligated no matter what. Doesn't matter if the earnings are less than what she eats, he still has to provide for it. Ukburata tachat ketubata. Her burial costs are in exchange for the ketubah meaning the things that she brings into the marriage. That dowry amount, what that she brings into the marriage, he keeps if she predeceases him, but he has to pay for the burial. And so this actually kind of explains what we saw previously, is that he would, in the case where even though the chuppah didn't happen, he would, presumably, according to the one that says he does keep the dowry, he would have to pay for the burial costs, and so he keeps the dowry. So you see, it all makes sense. Lefichach ba'al ochel perot. Therefore, the husband eats the produce of the land that she brought in. Now, no one ever mentioned anything about perot, so there's something missing in this baraita. Perot mandachas shemayu. What are you talking about perot? We didn't see that. That's connected to anything. Chasur mechasera. Oh, you missed a line here. V'achi katane. The baraita should read tiknu mezonoteha tachad maseh yadeha. That we saw. Pirkona tachat perot. But now we're adding her redemption from kidnappers. That's in exchange for him, the husband, keeping the produce of the land that she owns. Ukbura tachat ketubata. Her burial costs are instead of the dowry that she brought in. Lefichach ba'al ochel perot. Now it makes sense. Therefore, the husband should have the perot. I mean, it's saying lefichach for this one particular because the father didn't get it. But the husband does get it because he is going to need to use that money if she would get kidnapped. Okay, now, my lefichach. What is it lefichach? What is it following from the saying therefore, right? I mean, it's kind of obvious from the tachad by itself. Mahu detema mechal lanichlinu anuchen nanchinu. Because you might have thought that he should not be able to keep the produce and use it as regular funds to pay for the electric bill, but rather he should have to set it aside. All the money that comes from the produce of her land should be put into a separate account as kidnapping insurance, should she need it. Because if he uses it just to pay the regular bills, then when the time comes that she's kidnapped, he's not going to have all that money saved up, and he's not going to want to go and dig out from the regular expenses extra money to pay for the kidnapping. So you might have thought that he's required to put it into a separate account. So the lefichach comes to teach us that this is actually an extra benefit for her sake, because it could be that the produce is not sufficient for the kidnapping price, for the ransom price. It could be that the produce that comes in adds up to $1,000, even after a few years, $5,000. But then she gets kidnapped and they want $50,000. So if he put it into a separate account, he'll say, well, the account only has $5,000. That's all I'm willing to pay for your redemption. So by allowing the husband to keep it and use it as he wishes, it also means that should the ransom amount be more, then the husband has to cover all of that cost. Okay, now ve'ipuch ana. Question about this, the way that broke it down here. How do you know that the produce is for ransom? And each of these, maybe the produce is for as instead of her feeding her, and the ketubah is instead of the produce, right? Why'd you line it up precisely in this way? Why not switch it around? We do the one, whatever is more common, whatever happens on a regular basis. So feeding the wife, that happens on a regular basis every day. And so too, if she works on a regular basis, she receives earnings every day. So those those are daily occurrences. It makes sense to put those together. Produce happens only once every season, and so too redeeming her should she be taken captive. Hopefully it never happens, but it happens. It shouldn't happen. It's once in a while, so that makes sense. The dowry is something that the father would bring in only once in the beginning of the marriage. And her dying, burial rites, is also something that happens only once in her lifetime. So it makes sense that all of these are matched up with each other. Amar Rava, Tana sabar mezonot mideoraita. Rava said that this Tana in the Braita, following Braita we're going to see, holds that his husband's obligation to feed his wife is from the Torah. Titanya, she'era. The pasuk says he cannot diminish for her. He was talking about a amah that's sold to a master, and if the master marries her, even if he marries another woman, he has to make sure that he never diminishes from the basic obligations to this any one of his wives. So from that example, we learn to all marriages that the basic obligation of a husband to his wife are these items. So what are they? She'era means sustenance, food. A pasuk in Micha says, who also ate the flesh of my people. Very negative pasuk, but it is talking about eating, and so therefore we connect she'era to eating. Kesuta kemashmao. Kesuta is clothing, simple. Onata zo ona amura batorah v'chen hu omer im te'aneh et benotai. Ona are the regular conjugal rights that a husband has to be with his wife on a regular basis, and we learn that from Lot, who told Lavan, who told Yaakov when Yaakov was running away with Lavan's daughters, and he said, "Okay, fine, you can go, but im ta'aneh, if you torture my daughters." How is he going to torture them? If he neglects them and goes and marries other people, other women, and doesn't give regular conjugal rights. So the truth is that it is the same three-letter root, but it's completely different meaning. Ona means marital rights. Inui means to abuse. So he meant if you abuse my so it's in a way opposite meanings, but nevertheless, the point is, refusing. One is a PL. So refusing those conjugal rights. So we do learn that ona means conjugal rights. Okay. Rabbi Elazar Omer. Rabbi Elazar agrees, but he interprets the words differently. She'era zo'ana. He thinks that she'era, that's referring to conjugal rights. V'chen hu omer ish el kol she'er besalo lo tikrebu legalot arva. In the pasuk that talks about prohibition against incest, it uses the word she'er. So she'er is used in the context of relations, and these are prohibited types of relations, but with marriage it would be permitted and obligated to have relations. She'er here literally just means flesh, like flesh and blood, meaning a close relation. And so she'er would mean that a man has to be with his wife and come together as one flesh. Kisuta kemashmao, again, that's as easy, that's clothing. Onata elu mezonot v'chen omer vayannecha vayadri becha. So he switches she'era and onata. I think onata, that's talking about food. As it says, this is Parashat HaShavua, that Hashem afflicted Bnei Israel in the desert and made them suffer hunger, and then gave them the man, so that they would appreciate that they are dependent on Hashem for everything. Here, Vayanecha is also the word of inui, of suffering, of torture. Now, onata doesn't mean that a husband is obligated to torture her and make her starve. It's again the opposite meaning. But within the context is Vayanecha virbecha, holding back food and then giving man. So ona is related to food. This is his obligation to feed her. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, she'era kesuta. Rabbi Eliezer Yaakov learned yet a different halacha from the words that are back to back. She'era and kesuta. So flesh and clothing. These two words explain each other. Lefum she'era ten kesuta. According to her flesh, so you should give her clothing. Give her clothing that fits. Don't give children's clothing to an older woman or old clothing to a young woman. It could mean just the size, right? People grow, especially if they get married at 12. Then you have to give them appropriate size. And style also, right, is different styles for different ages. So you can't just buy your wife a wardrobe once and say, that's it, I bought you clothes. No, you have to change as they change. Kesuta ve'onata, and we also connect kesuta with the next word, also that explains it. Lefum onata, ten kesuta, ona can mean season. You have to give her clothing according to the seasons. Shelo yiten hadashim b'mota hama, velo shechakim b'mota geshamim. That you don't give new, meaning when the clothing is new, it's heavy, it's thick. You don't give that in the summer. When it's worn out, it already is like sheer, has holes in it, air conditioning. You don't give that in the winter when you need warmer clothes. So to today, you have to make sure that your wife is able to go shopping for every season, and you don't say, well, I already bought you clothes in the winter. You don't have to buy clothes in the summer. No, not true. Okay. Taneh Rav Yosef, She'era zo keru basar. A different interpretation of She'era, which means flesh. This means that the wife has a right to have feel closeness of flesh, to cuddle together. Shelo yinhag ba minhag parsiyim, and don't do what the Persians do. Shemeshameshin metotehen bilbushehen, because they have sexual relations with their clothing on. And it's not as intimate, and it's not as nice to treat the man to treat his wife that way, as if she is just kind of an object, and not show her loving and kindness. But that would be expressed through touching of flesh. For example, we have Rav Huna says, if a man says, I don't want to sleep without with closeness of flesh. I'll have relations, but with clothes on. I don't know, like maybe he doesn't like the way she looks, or I don't know why. He would do that. Yosiv inoten ketubah. He would have to divorce her and pay her ketubah because he's not fulfilling she'era. She'era means that he has to, he can't act the way the Persians act. Okay, very interesting. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen ve'amen.